Namaskar. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dada Gunatmananda, and today I'm giving a talk about the cycle of creation. And in this lecture, we will discuss how consciousness is transformed into the universe and into life, and then how the living beings return to consciousness. And this is a very vast topic, so I'm not going to go into all the details. It's a way to contextualize your existence within the cosmos. And when I was a brand new person on this path, this was sort of the foundational concept to understand. And it's like an edifice in your mind. And slowly, you incorporate more and more things into this understanding as you develop. The purpose of understanding about the cosmic cycle is because it allows you to contextualize your life and understand how the things that are happening to you fit in to a very long journey you've been on since the dawn of creation. So let's get started. I'm going to share a presentation to start. Okay, so the cosmic cycle is called Brahma Chakra. Brahma, I think, as everyone knows, well, it kind of means like God. It's the supreme entity. And chakra means cycle or wheel. The fundamental entity is consciousness. In Sanskrit, consciousness is called purusa. Consciousness is the witness. Consciousness is that which you cannot see because it does the seeing. Fundamentally, we are all what we would call a unit consciousness. What you are at this moment is that which is witnessing everything happen. Right? You are the witness of all the activities that are happening in this moment, but from a certain perspective, from the perspective of your consciousness, which is looking at the universe through your mind. So in the same way that I cannot see my own eye, right? This eye, I cannot see consciousness. I can't see my eye because my eye does the seeing. I can see everything else that's around, but I can't see the eye itself. However, even though I can't see my eye, I know that it exists because I have vision. Right? The fact that there's lights and colors, even if I'd never seen another person or looked into a mirror, I know I had some instrument that allowed me to see, even though I couldn't see it, because I have vision. In the same way, you can never see your own consciousness, right? Because anything you can see is a seen entity. Consciousness is the witness itself. It is the pure subjectivity. It has no aspect of objectivity. So even the feeling that I exist is not your pure witness. It's not your pure subjectivity because you know you exist. So there must be something that knows you exist, and that is consciousness. And so although you cannot see consciousness, you still know you have consciousness because you know you exist. Because that you're not a radio playing music in an empty room. There's some subjective aspect to everything about you. So just as you know you have eyes because you have vision, you know you have consciousness because you experience your own existence. You're aware of that. Okay. So in the beginning, there's only consciousness, unmanifested consciousness, a subjective force which had nothing to witness. Now, if consciousness is the witness, it must have some power to create something which can be witnessed, right? If you were a musician, but you never played music, you could still say you're a musician. However, you must at least have the capacity, the dormant capacity, the latent capacity to make some music. So therefore, consciousness in the beginning is called nirguna. It means it has no expression, it has no manifestation, it's not witnessing anything, right? But it still has the ability to witness. And therefore, it must have the ability to create something which can be witnessed. This ability to create something which can be witnessed, we call prakriti. And so Brahma is a composite of two things, a witnessing consciousness and the ability to metamorphose consciousness into something that can be witnessed. Okay, so consciousness is going to create something to witness. It's going to create a universe and then witness this universe. But what is he going to create the universe out of? If you want to make a pot, you use clay. If you want to make a table, you use wood. If consciousness wants to make a universe, what is the material? Well, there's only consciousness. And so the material of the universe is made out of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is when you think about the cause of something, right? If I say, what is the cause of a pot? Well, on one hand, you can say the cause of the pot is called clay, right? That's the material cause. On the other hand, you could say, well, the cause of the pot is the hands of the potter that shaped the clay. Or you could say, no, the cause of the pot is the mind of the potter who was controlling everything. And so there's, in that sense, consciousness is like the mind of the potter that created the pot, but it's also like the clay the pot was made out of. And the reason consciousness can play both roles is consciousness has the ability to divide itself into two parts, a subject and an object. And that's the fundamental thing that Prakriti is doing, is taking a subjective entity and half of it is saying, oh, this part is going to be the object and this part is going to be the subject, and the subject is going to look at the object. So Brahma Chakra is this cycle. The extraversal movement is known as sanchara. The intraversal movement is known as pratisanchara. It's a movement where consciousness goes down to crude matter, then crude matter returns back to consciousness. And human beings are on the return journey. In fact, we're very far advanced on the return journey, right? Where consciousness is coming back. And as life evolves in the return journey, you get higher and higher expressions of consciousness because consciousness is returning to its pure form, its pure subjectivity. And so evolution is an evolution where the subjective aspect becomes more expanded. Prakriti is composed of three principles: Sattvaguna, Rajaguna, and Tamaguna. And probably many of you have heard of these, right? We say certain food is static, like meat. Certain food is sentient, like an apple, because it has a predominance of one of these certain qualities. Sattvaguna gives the awareness of I exist, the feeling of happiness that isn't for any cause, any objective cause, right? Sometimes you're just sitting and you're just aware, I'm amazed at my own happiness. You're walking through the forest, just wandering amazed at your existence, at the glee of the joy that's inside of you. And it's not like you're happy because you achieved something or got a good grade, right? It's something deeper than that. And this is the feeling, the sentient feeling. Rajaguna is the mutative feeling. we're active, we're doing things. It makes us want to transform our minds into some other state, means some other objective state, right? And so the result of activity is that there is some new object created, right? So tamaguna is the static principle, and that's the object. Mahat, aham, and chitta. The first thing that's created from consciousness is the feeling that I exist, right? So if you have nothing, you have only subjectivity, obviously the first thing you have to create is existence itself. And that's created by sattva guna, right? Prakriti is going to qualify consciousness. And so when sattva guna qualifies consciousness, it creates this feeling that I exist. Then when rajaguna qualifies the feeling of I exist, it creates the feeling that I do. When I do is qualified by tamaguna, it creates the feeling that this is some object, right? It's an objective feeling. So chitta is the objective mind. Aham is the part of mind that does actions, and mahat is the subjective mind, the feeling that I exist. And above them all is the witnessing consciousness. So here's a pictorial representation of this process. You start out with pure consciousness, this circle, and then Prakriti does that. It divides consciousness in half. Maybe not exactly in half, right? It's infinite. You can't really speak logically of half, but it divides it into a subjective aspect and the objective aspect. So the witnessing entity is going to witness the feeling that I exist. I know I exist. There's two I's in that sentence, right? The I know is the purely subjective I, and the I exist is a functional form, right? And then Mahat, it's still consciousness. Therefore, it still has the ability to make an object, to divide itself into subject and object. It still has the ability to qualify itself. And so Mahat divides itself into subject and object, makes something called aham, the feeling that I do. Well, aham is still consciousness. It's just been qualified twice. It's been crudified twice. So it still has the power of prakriti. And it divides itself into aham and chitta. Now, chitta is an objective form of mind, but ultimately it's still consciousness. So it can still divide itself. And it divides itself and divides itself in 6 stages. And these are called the lokas, right? They're the layers within the cosmic mind, the layers within the universe. The paraloka, janarloka, maharaloka, svarloka, bhuvarloka, and borloka. Borloka is the actual physical universe. And the physical universe is composed of 5 fundamental factors. The ethereal factor, the aerial factor, the luminous, the liquid, and the solid factor. Now, when we think about the cosmic mind having lokas, what does that mean? Right? The cosmic objective mind has lokas. If you take any object, let's say a sunflower seed. Now, when you look at the sunflower seed, you experience, it has a certain color, it has a certain shape, it has a certain feel, it has a certain smell, it has a certain taste. Well, that's in the bottommost loka. That's the physical existence of the sunflower seed. If you go one level up, you will say, there's also some qualities of that. Some mental feelings related to that. If you say, for example, sugar is sweet, well, sweetness is a feeling in your mind when you eat sugar, right? So that sweetness would be in the bhuvarloka. No, it's not actually the flavor of the sugar. It's the subjective feeling we get from that sugar, that sweetness, but it's related to the physical existence. And the next loka, you have certain, you could say, intellectual aspects of this sunflower seed. It's made of certain chemical elements. But no matter how much you analyze that seed in your laboratory, you will never discover the sunflower itself. You will never discover that blossoming entity that is somehow inside that seed, yet is not yet manifest. And so when you go up to the next loka, the Maharloka, there exist those potentialities that have yet to become. Right? They exist in you, they exist in the sunflower. That is there. Right? It's part of the seed, yet it's not manifest in the universe yet. When you come to Janarloka, this is a bit more difficult to understand, Janarloka. I'll try to explain it, but I can't use a sunflower seed because a sunflower seed is not quite subtle enough to understand what the experience we get within this Janarloka. So one thing to say about the Maharloka, yes, the flower was within the sunflower seed, but that flower is within every sunflower seed, right? You can say that's the sort of the truth of the sunflower seed. It's Dharma. And the seed that didn't sprout, that rotted in the ground, it didn't realize it's Dharma, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. No, in the same way, it's the Dharma of people to be spiritual, and that we don't see that manifest doesn't mean it's not there latent inside of every person. Now, to understand Janarloka, allow me to tell a little story. This story was written by Rabindranath Tagore. Now, one time, Rabindranath Tagore, he was taking a boat across the Ganges River. It was a small boat. He was sitting in the boat, and there was a fisherman rowing the boat, taking him across the river. And it was dusk. The sun was setting. The workers were walking home from their fields. The water was perfectly still, except for the ripples caused by the boat as he went across the river. And the entire beautiful pink sunset was reflected off of the surface of the water. It was a beautiful, peaceful, tranquil moment. And this poet was absorbed in the thought of God, you know. And then just at that moment, a fish leapt out of the water, arched its back, its silver belly arched towards the sun. And the poet could see the entire sunset reflecting off the belly of the fish. And in the words of Tagore, he said, that fish leapt out of the water like a gift from the cosmos, and I saw the entire scene reflected off its belly, and he understood that that fish had come to contribute some music to the symphony of the setting sun. Right? Now, that was something unique that fish had come to express. And this is the awareness of Janarloka. We have this discrimination of what is some very, in essence, some reason something has come into this world beyond that which is shared with all other entities. Right? A sunflower is a sunflower, but that fish had something special to contribute. Now, at the level of Taparloka, it's just the awareness of consciousness. Everything is an expression of consciousness. Everything is God. All right. So this descending process from pure consciousness down to crude matter is called sanchara. Now, here's a sentence: I am seeing the flower. I am, we would say, is Mahat. I exist. The flower, well, that's an object in the chitta. The cosmos has a chitta, but you also have a chitta. When you imagine a flower in your mind, that flower takes form in your chitta. And if you make that flower start to move back and forth in your mind, you realize, oh, I have the capacity to control that chitta. Well, that ability to control that chitta, that's in the layer of mind we call aham. And your feeling that I exist has no direct connection with the chitta, right? I exist and the flower they don't touch each other, right? They're connected through the aham. And the structure of our mind is reflected in the languages which we have created. Right? We have subject, verb, and then object. I am seeing the flower. But you also know that you're seeing the flower. And that's the consciousness. Right? Without consciousness, the fact that you're seeing the flower is not substantiated. If you don't know you're seeing a flower, are you seeing a flower? If you don't know you're thinking something, are you thinking something? Right? That consciousness witnessing it has to be there. Without the witnessing consciousness, there can be no other existence. So here is a pictorial representation of the whole cycle. It goes a bit fast, so watch closely. So consciousness descends from the pure consciousness, which is a triangle at the top. It's a triangle because you have the three gunas and they're not expressing themselves. First, it's create Mahat, Aham, then the cosmic Chitta, and then the five fundamental factors. At the end of consciousness, finally, you have matter. You have physical objects. And then something magical happens, right? This crudification of consciousness has reached its terminus point. It could not go on forever. Right? But the Prakriti is still putting pressure, right? It still wants to qualify consciousness, but solid factor is as crude as it can get. You can't go any further. You can't make something more objective than a physical object. And what happens is within the object, this force of Prakriti has to be channelized into a process we call life. And life uses this energy of Prakriti to propel itself back towards consciousness. It's sort of as if you are on a cosmic trampoline. The infinite consciousness jumped on the trampoline, but eventually the trampoline goes back as far as it can. Then it starts to bounce back. But the return journey is not just an undoing of the descending journey. Consciousness, as one entity, moves itself in a hierarchical fashion from subtle to crude, but the return is in the form of individual minds, playing the game, the cosmic dance within this arena created by consciousness. So in the unit being, you also have the 6 layers that correspond to the layers of the cosmic chitta. Now, the first layer is the physical body. It's not a mental layer. That corresponds to the physical universe and the cosmic mind. Then you have these other kosas, they're called. Kamamaya, Manomaya, Atimanas, Viganamaya, and Hirmaya kosa. And they correspond to the layers of the cosmic mind. So when you perceive the physical aspects of the sunflower seed, you do that in your Kamamaya kosa. When you understand the mental aspects of the sunflower seed, you do that in your Manomaya kosa. Those creative aspects of the sunflower seeds, those dormant potentials which are yet to be, you get a sense of them in your Atimanas kosa. That's your creative mind. The Viganamaya kosa can distinguish the true essence of things, what they came for. And the Hirmaya kosa can understand that everything is an expression of consciousness. Above that, you have your unit aham, your individual feeling that I can do actions. And above that, you have your feeling that I exist. And above that, there is again consciousness. So this process of sanchara, when it comes to its end, okay, what it's saying here is trying to understand the difference between the different layers of the mind, right? And it's all mind, but just like water has different forms, it can be steam, it can be liquid, it can be solid. This mind also has different levels, different phases which go through transformations in this process. And so at the end of sanchara process, there's a turning point, right? This bottom point where in the picture there was that picture of the atom. And in a process I don't want to take so much time to discuss, the object develops something we call prana, right? This life force. And it also develops a little bit of mind within that object. So when the physical structure vibrates strongly due to the clash of interior forces, a certain control must be exercised over the structure to ensure it doesn't explode or it doesn't implode. Under such circumstances, the prana, that energy, will have to act under its own initiative. Otherwise, the object is going to deteriorate. So when this prana starts to control the object to resist the force of Prakriti, that's what is life. Life is a process where the structure is maintained in opposition to what you would call entropic forces. But prana, the life force, doesn't do it alone. Prana is the force which is able to control life and make it happen, but prana is in itself controlled by the mind. So prana is a blind force, but the mind is using prana to control the physical aspects of the living being and make it maintain homeostasis. So if you look at a cell, or you go on, obviously you can't see a cell. If you go on a YouTube and you watch a video about a cell, you will see inside that cell, there's so much activity. There's DNA dividing and reforming and reproducing itself. There's RNA being copied, going out in the cytoplasm, making proteins. These proteins are moving around and interacting with each other. It's really amazing how this is going on. But if at one moment that cell was to die, all that activity would stop. You just have a collection of molecules sitting there in a heap, doing nothing. Yet all the same physical substance was there. There's nothing physically different from a living cell and a dead cell in the sense that there's nothing missing. What's missing is the mind is not in the dead cell. The mind has left, and therefore the prana is not being controlled. And if the prana isn't there to make those atoms move around, they're not going to do what they do. They're just going to sit there. And so what happens at that nadir point, that bottom point where you go from sanchara to prati sanchara, mind enters that structure, and it has to, because that structure has to become complicated, has to start to dance, has to start to utilize the energy of Prakriti to be alive. Right? If it doesn't, that energy of Prakriti is going to make that object decompose or explode. Okay. So the underlying force which drives evolution is the urge of consciousness to be free from bondage. Consciousness in the form of a solid factor was under maximum bondage. Right? It was maximally crudified. You could not notice that it was consciousness. It's not correct to say, if I take a stone, that this stone has consciousness in it. That's not accurate. This stone is consciousness. It is a crudified form of consciousness. And this isn't just any stone. We bought this stone, expensive stone. But that consciousness is stuck. It's stuck in the form of a physical object. And it cannot get any more crude than this. So it starts to become complicated. It starts to become alive. Now, even an individual atom has some small bit of mind in it. It has all the fundamental factors in it. Then, so this return journey starts as a result of consciousness becoming maximally crudified and the energy of Prakriti not being able to do anything else. It can either make the object explode or the energy has to start to be utilized to create life. And another word for pratisanchara is evolution. Right? But the driving force of evolution is not random mutation. It's not survival of the fittest. Whatever is the force behind evolution, you must feel it within yourself now because you are still part of that process. That process of evolution, which is taking a single bacteria or cell or atom and moving it through the ages to become a dignified, intelligent human being. Well, that process is also the same reason you're sitting here listening to a lecture or making effort to do sadhana or going to university to study something. Right? That urge you feel inside yourself to move forward and progress and achieve something more sublime. Well, that's the force of consciousness wanting to become one with itself. And this force of consciousness that wants to become one with itself is manifested in all life. That's the underlying urge which is making life happen and making life progress and evolve from one stage to another stage. So this process of evolution has two parallel movements. One of those movements is the expansion of mind through successive reincarnations. So you were a bacteria, you got reincarnated as an amoeba, you got reincarnated as some multi-celled little creature floating around, then eventually as a plant, and then a flower, then a tree, then a mosquito, I don't know, right? And on and on and on and on. And with each successive reincarnation, your mind is becoming more subtle, more evolved, and your consciousness is becoming more expanded, right? The subjective aspect is slowly getting domination over the objective aspect. In the crudest form, in the physical objects, the objective aspect is 100%, right? Now, there's always the cosmic consciousness witnessing it, but within that object, consciousness has become completely encapsulated or hidden. And so this process of creation is a return journey. And so the other movement that's going on in Pratisanchara is the evolution of species. So you could understand it like this. The evolution of species is like building a ladder, adding another rung and a rung on the ladder, right? The expansion of mind is, well, that's the individual mind climbing up that ladder. And so to understand evolution, it was the mind that was evolving. And as the mind evolves, it needs a more subtle body, a more advanced body. It needs some way to express itself in a more complicated body. So that needs a different physical structure. You can understand it like this. Imagine you're in a room with no windows, right? And one of the walls is made of a very completely opaque, dark paper. But on the other side of that wall, there's bright light. Right? So this is the form when there's only physical matter, the dark room. The earth is there. Then someone starts poking little holes through that paper. And you're in that dark room, those little points of holes, light starts to shine through. Right? From the earth made of solid matter, life starts to grow. Plants are shooting out here and there. Consciousness is pushing its way through the veil of the material illusion, right? To express itself as the reality of creation. And then these holes start to get bigger and bigger. More light starts to shine through. That's the evolution of life, the expansion of these holes and allowing the light of consciousness to shine through. And at some point, these plants start to grow flowers. Now, we think of flower as something very beautiful, but animals don't think that. The beauty which we see in the world, that was for human beings to realize when human beings finally came into this creation. Right? With their expanded mind, with their knowledge that I exist, and could look at these flowers and say, wow, it's beautiful. And it could help them to understand that there's more to life than the physical world. There is something subtle behind creation. And it's saying hello to me in the form of a flower, letting me know that my life has a purpose. And when you perceive consciousness in another entity, that perception of the human mind that perceives, knowingly or unknowingly, there is consciousness there. That is what we experience as beauty. Right? We see the flower, and it makes us understand we have a consciousness because we can feel the consciousness from the outside world. It's kind of a strange thing. The physical sense organs we have, which usually distract us from our consciousness, they can also help us when they see something beautiful. When we have that recognition that, wow, this physical world is not just a physical world. It's an expression of consciousness. So this evolutionary, when life evolves, when you go from one species to another species, the physical structure has to change. You need to get different hormones. You need to get different network of neurons to control the physical structure. And not just the physical changes. Within the mind, that mind has to know how to use the prana to operate that body. It's almost like there's an operating system. Even if you look at a little cell, you say, oh, the mind of the cell, it knows how to use the prana to make all that activity happen. But you could say the mind is like the I don't know, I'm not the processor and the memory of a computer. But that mind has to have an operating system. It has to be programmed how to use the prana to make that cell happen. Right? Where does that information come from? Where does that knowledge come from? Well, you see, life is not a random process. At every step in the way, Brahma is playing a role. His infinite knowledge is put in place at each stage along the way. When life evolves, to another level, it's not just a physical transformation. It's not just a hormonal change, right? There's also instincts which that living being has to allow it to use that new body. There's also information in that mind when it evolves. And Brahma is always making sure that every living being along the way knows how to use its physical body, knows how to express itself. Because that mind has to go through things in the form of that physical body to evolve to the next stage. Creation is a gradual process. Evolution is a gradual process. And so we say that except for human beings in the natural world, from the bacteria to the plants to the animals, they're all guided by the cosmic mind. They don't have an individual will or a sense of individuality. They're merged in the flow of nature, and every animal is moving forward on its journey. So I want to take a moment to talk about Darwinism. The reason is because this is the materialistic explanation of life, but Darwinism also puts people's lives in a context of sort of a random or competitive process, which is in contradistinction to the idea of Brahma Chakra, which we want to put your life in the context of an evolution of consciousness back towards source. So Darwinism, Darwin had two ideas. One was that evolution is not a straight sequence. It's a branching evolution, right? Before Darwin was around, everyone thought, okay, there's just a strict hierarchy of life. And Darwin says, no, it's not like that. It's a branching evolution, right? So there is sort of a hierarchy, but it's a branching hierarchy. And that was the main point of his book when, this, what do you call this? The Origin of Species. But then there was another idea. What is the mechanism behind evolution? What is making these changes happen? He was kind of confused. He didn't know how to explain it. He hadn't discovered that yet. He read an economics book by a guy named Thomas Mathis. And in this economics book, Thomas Mathis was saying, well, imagine you have an island of dog and sheep. And if the dogs didn't eat the sheep, then the sheep would overpopulate and die. And Thomas Mathis was using this as a rationalization for a system where rich people were exploiting poor people, right? The sheep in this metaphor were the poor people, and the dogs in his metaphor were the rich people. And he was saying, well, if the rich don't exploit the poor will overpopulate and they will starve to death. So therefore, this is why he's a God system. The natural order of things is that there should be a few rich people dominating and getting the benefit from a few poor people. And this was just in they're sort of laying the foundations for a transformation to capitalist society at this time. So anyway, but when Darwin read this book, he got the idea that must be what's making evolution work. But actually, he expressed later, he's like, it also doesn't seem to be able to explain things, and he had a few examples, particularly monkeys, that sort of, he said, my idea about survival of the fittest, it can't explain this evolution or why monkeys behave socially the way they do. So he had doubts about it. Mathematicians had doubts about it. They said, random. I mean, it'd be kind of like if you had a computer program and you just sort of start randomly changing some codes, and would you expect that might somehow make the program better? So evolution is not a statistically logical idea. It cannot explain the complexity of unicellular life, and it cannot explain evolutionary jumps. Right? Darwinist evolution does not allow for any jumps. It only allows for what we call genetic drift. Right? Very minute changes based on little changes happening. Even that's statistically virtually impossible. And we would never expect to see that even once in the age of the universe, yet we continuously see it happening. So there must be something else. It can't be a random process. Right? When you say random, you imagine a drunk man walking out of the bar, just sort of stumbling to the left and stumbling to the right. He's never going to make it home, right? Unless in the aspect of his stumbling, he's sort of moving in a certain direction, but then it's not completely random, right? So evolution has a direction. It's moving from simple to complicated. But more than that, in evolution, we constantly see jumps happening. In the fossil record, we're seeing jump after jump after jump. And how can that happen? So I'll give a few examples. If you look at the bird, sorry, this is not just a bird, this is a woodpecker. A woodpecker has a long tongue. And if you look at the diagram, the woodpecker's tongue doesn't come out directly from its mouth. It wraps around from the back of his head and comes out his mouth. Now, the woodpecker evolved from a bird whose tongue came directly out the mouth. But how can this process of the tongue going from directly out the mouth change to a process where the tongue is going around the back of the head out the mouth? It couldn't be a gradual transformation, right? Because if you did, for millions of years, the bird would have no tongue at all. Right? As slowly, the channel is being built to go around the back of the head, and the tongue is changing its shape to go around the back of the head. So for millions of years, that bird couldn't eat. But there's another problem with it, is that Darwin, it doesn't just say that there's random changes. It says that those random changes have to give the species an advantage, right? The genotypic changes have to give some objective advantage. Otherwise, they won't be selected in the process of competition, right? So evolution would not allow for any gradual change, which doesn't give an immediate advantage to that species at that moment, right? So, or if you think of the giraffe doesn't just have a long neck. And if you ask a child why the giraffe has a long neck, the child's going to say he wants to get to the tall leaves. And the child will be actually correct. Right? The mind of the creature before it was a giraffe wanted something, had some urge. Right? And that urge of the mind to transform itself, that was the root cause of the genetic change. The giraffe not only has a long neck, it has a sponge in his brain to hold blood. Why that sponge is there? Because when the giraffe will stand up, its blood won't have enough, its brain won't have enough blood. It would get dizzy and fall over because it's so tall. And so if it's bending over to drink water, and then a lion comes and scares the giraffe, and the giraffe stands up very quickly, if it didn't have a sponge full of blood next to its brain, the giraffe would get dizzy and fall over, and the lion would just walk up and eat the giraffe. And the lion would be like, oh, giraffes are great. Such a big feast. I don't even have to chase it. Just scare it while it's drinking and it falls over. So the giraffe wouldn't survive as a species for very long because it couldn't drink and stand up. Luckily, evolution gave it these sponges full of blood so that when it stands up, they squeeze the blood to the giraffe's brain and the giraffe doesn't get dizzy. Now, you couldn't have a long neck without sponges, yet the verse is also true. You wouldn't have sponges without a long neck because it wouldn't give you an advantage in survival, so they wouldn't be selected in an evolutionary process. Now, a giraffe also has valves in its neck because for the opposite reason, when it goes over to drink water, it would have too much blood pressure in its brain and it would have an aneurysm. So therefore, evolution gave it valves in its neck to prevent a buildup of blood pressure when it tips over. But you couldn't have a long neck without valves, but you couldn't have valves without a long neck. Means in the case of the woodpecker, in the case of the giraffe, all these changes had to happen simultaneously, right? But that's not one mutation, right? That's thousands of simultaneously beneficial mutations. The probability of that, is for all practical purposes completely zero. Since the average mutation is harmful, the probability of many beneficial mutations, well, it's zero if it was a random process. And it is not only that a horse has to sort of suddenly give birth to a giraffe, but it has to do it twice. So it's no good if the first giraffe is born and he's like, wow, I'm so lucky to be a giraffe. What are the odds? But he's a boy and there's no girl giraffe. Shoot, he's stuck. It has to happen twice at the same generation. Now, this is getting pretty fantastic story to expect something like this to happen, unless you realize that the idea of Darwinism is a materialistic attempt to explain life, which is not material. Material science is very good at explaining the movement of atoms. Well, sort of. It runs into some problems when you start to get too subtle. When you use materialistic science to explain something like life, which relies on a mind which is not material and a consciousness which is not material, then you get explanations which don't really hold up under scrutiny. And as soon as you allow that, the giraffe has a mind, then you open up the possibility that there's a whole realm of different explanations that are going on to explain evolution. Okay. So in the process of Pratisanchara, the first life forms that we see, they have only chitta. Now, a life form with only chitta, it can reproduce by division. The quantity of chitta increases due to clash and cohesion. So that little bacteria has only chitta, but that bacteria is struggling against a world outside that is controlled by the forces of physics. Right? So you have a biological entity has to maintain its homeostasis in an environment that is not helping it. Right? And even for that simple mind, this is creating a certain amount of clash. And this clash is allowing that mind to start to expand. Now, in this basic structure, the mind and the prana can only maintain the physical structure. It can't really do anything extra. Right? That mind, that body can't move around and interact with the environment in a purposeful way. So, but maintaining homeostasis is already in itself very complicated, right? That's very amazing. And that's what that basic mind is doing, is maintaining that homeostasis. And my spiritual teacher, he has said, life is a never-ending struggle to maintain an unstable equilibrium. What that means is that if I take a bowl, right, and Give me the bowl, Didi. This one. Oh, this is not a good one. It's a pretty flat bowl. But if I have a bowl and I put a golf ball inside the bowl, well, that's called a stable equilibrium. It's not going to go anywhere, right? Okay, but imagine this is a round bowl. It's not a round bowl. If I take a ball and a golf ball and I put it on top of the bowl, well, that's unstable. It's not going to naturally stay there. I'd have to make energy to balance, or the same way, like this is sort of stable, but if I want to balance this on my hand, right, I have to use energy to maintain that balance. And so life is sort of like that. It's a never-ending endeavor to maintain an unstable equilibrium. And this requires mind to distinguish between what to do and what not to do. And it requires energy, and that's the prana. And because of that, life has to consume energy. Otherwise, it can't maintain this equilibrium. And so this basic life form with only chitta, that's what it's doing. It only has the objective mind. It just has this feeling of objectivity. It doesn't have any feeling that I can do actions. It doesn't have any feeling that I exist yet. The next layer of mind, the next kind of species, well, you get a little bit of this thing we call aham, means doership, right? And what is that doership doing? Well, at first, it just allows this being to somehow interact with the environment, but the chitta is still the dominant part of this life form. Now, any life form that has only chitta and aham, it doesn't have a feeling that I exist. Such life forms are able to reproduce by division, that you don't require sexual reproduction. For example, obviously all the cells in your body, they have only chitta, right? They don't even have a feeling of I do. That's why your big human mind and your prana is able to control those cells, and they don't resist. The cell's not like, oh, I don't want to do what you want to do, because it has no aham. You can just manipulate it as you want. And now the sperm cell is a little bit different, isn't it? Right? The sperm cell has a tail on it, and it can wiggle through the water and find that egg. Right? It has some feeling I do there. So the sperm cell is quite an advanced cell. It's the most advanced. The reproductive cells are the most advanced cells we have in terms of having this aham inside. Now, most plants also have only chitta. There are maybe a few plants that have some aham, but plants don't have a mahat. They don't have this feeling I exist, which is the root reason why it's good to be vegetarian. They don't have nervous system. They don't have a feeling I exist. Yes, a vegetarian is going to kill something else, but that entity doesn't feel I exist, right? You look at grass. Grass grows here, it grows there. You take a piece of grass, you can replant it over there, right? It doesn't have a feeling I exist. A tree, you chop off the branch, you stick it in the water, a new tree is going to grow. Right? There can be no feeling of I exist, right? Now, there are some animals where you cut off their arm, they can regrow the arm, but the piece of arm that's been cut off, that won't grow into a new animal, will it? Right? So the mosquito, if I kill the mosquito, right, it doesn't become many mosquitoes. Like you've seen this movie Fantasia, right? Mickey Mouse is, I think, killing the dancing broom with an axe. He chops up into many brooms, and they all become dancing brooms. And he's like, oh my God, I just made the problem worse. Well, those are creatures that don't have mahat. They don't have feeling I exist. So a mosquito has a feeling of I exist. Doesn't seem more evolved than a tree. Like you look at the tree, you think it's so beautiful, but actually that annoying little mosquito has a more advanced mind than that tree. So the aham is able to activate the structure. So now this life form, be it a multicellular or singular cellular creature, can do something, can interact with the environment. Next, you get a little bit of mahat coming inside, this little green circle. The feeling that I exist is coming into the picture. Now this life form has to reproduce sexually or lay eggs or something like that. Now, the crudest kinds, like the snails, they have both reproductives. Like a snail cannot have sex with itself, but they have both male and female parts. and you know, you like insects and all these things. Their minds, they have some small bit of mahat, not very big, right? And you can tell that they don't really express their feeling of existence very much, you know. And the consciousness is very dormant. Now, one way to tell this is that they are completely guided by 100% inborn instincts, right? Mind at this level is not able to learn from experience or from doing mistakes or from whatever it encounters. You know, the fly is just going to sit there hitting the window again and again, trying to go outside. It's never going to learn. It's not going to work. A dog doesn't do that, right? A dog doesn't hit the door and just keep doing it again and again, right? It hits it a few times, it learns, oh, don't hit the door. It's not going to open. So a dog has a more advanced mind than a fly does. But still, the flies reproduce sexually. You know, they have some minimal sense of existence. And so there's something subtle inside of these creatures. The next thing that happens is the aham expands and becomes larger than the chitta. Now, and at the same time, I mean, when you go from one phase to another phase, everything's growing, but their relative sizes changes. So when the aham is bigger than the chitta, now you get something called intellect, right? That means that the chitta has objects. And when the aham is smaller than that, it cannot manipulate those objects. It cannot do anything with those objects. But when the aham expands beyond the chitta, that life form can start to manipulate those mental objects. You know, for example, a monkey can look at the bananas in the tree and look at the stone, and maybe it'll throw the stone at the banana, hoping the bananas will fall down. Probably a monkey would never do this because monkeys can just climb the tree and get the banana. But if you imagine a crippled monkey, right, whatever. But the reason a monkey might be able to do this, or the reason a dog might be able to learn, oh, if I can open the door with my paw, right, is because they have some very undeveloped, indistinct form of intellect there. And they are able to have a mental object, the banana in the tree, and a mental object, the rock. And their mind can sort of imagine the rock can hit the banana can fall, right? And so this ability of the aham to control the chitta, right? That's what we call intellect. And that arrives when the aham increases in size to become the largest part of the mind. It's bigger than the chitta, but mahat is still the smallest part of the mind. And here we have all the mammals and the birds, right, would fall into this category of creatures. So you basically, you essentially say warm-blooded creatures have intellect, right? And but if you look below that, you know, you can't really train a frog to do anything but be a frog. And so when you get to this stage, inborn instincts become a little bit less, and they're guided more by things they would call acquired instincts. Their behavior is still guided by instincts in the animal world, but they're no longer inborn instincts. They're different. They're something that they acquire. That's why you can train a dog. When you train a dog, you're basically giving the dog new instinctual programming. Those are called an acquired instinct. So the animals with this level, they're born with less instincts because they have the ability to adapt to different situations through a process of acquiring new instincts because they have an expanded mind. Now, the next stage is the mahat increases beyond the chitta. So here, still your aham is the biggest part, right? I do is the dominant part of the mind. I exist is intermediate, and chitta becomes smaller. We call this a human being, right? When mahat is bigger than the chitta, that means you don't just have objective thoughts. These thoughts are imbued with the feeling that I exist. They're my thoughts. We have some identity with them. And the reason this is such a tremendous transformation is because then you can have a sense of identity, a sense of individuality. You know, you have a mental object of me, of I. You can start to do things like have language. The entire game changes as soon as mahat becomes bigger than the chitta. And that's why human life is so vastly different from animal life. the sense of individuality arises, and at the same time, the sense of individual will arises. For the first time, you can act purposefully. So that's why they say animals are guided by the cosmic mind, but human beings can guide their own life. You're no longer guided and controlled by the cosmic mind. And therefore, human beings can choose to continue to move forward on the path of pratisanchara, or they can choose to do actions which will move them backwards. Essentially, why this ability for purposeful action comes up is because human beings can imagine a future. Once you have a concept of me, you can imagine a future existence of me which is different from the present. Then you can utilize the capacities you have to transform yourself or your situation into that future self or future situation. You can start to act with purpose, right? That which is yet to be becomes more real than that which is, right? Human beings are provident, right? They can bring things into manifestation. And therefore we create society, we create art, we create a lot of science, and we can do spiritual practice. We can do a spiritual practice because we can start to understand that there is something deep and meaningful and special about me, and I want to discover that and realize its truest self. So in the Bible, there is a metaphor that explains this transformation from animality to divinity. And it was explaining how humanity is not separate from nature. We have transcended nature, right? Our bodies are still governed by the rules of the physical world, but our minds have transcended nature in that respect. So this metaphor, of course, is the metaphor of paradise. Adam and Eve got kicked out of paradise because they ate an apple. Now, in this metaphor, paradise represents animal life, right? You're at one with nature, right? Nature being the expression of Brahma, but you're unconscious of it, right? And the apple was the fruit of knowledge, the knowledge that I exist. The snake said, if you eat that apple, you will start to become like God. That is the first step on the path of moving towards divinity. And Eve gave the apple to Adam, and Adam ate the apple. And then they were embarrassed that they were naked. They start to look down and say, make distinctions, make discriminations, make judgments. And God kicked them out of paradise. Now, being naked in this metaphor signifies that, yes, they were human beings in the sense that their mind had expanded and they had a sense of individuality, a sense of individual will, yet they had not yet evolved the capacities to live as human beings, right? It's not enough that you have a feeling of individuality. You also have to have rationality, brotherly love. I mean, humanity had to go through many, many millennia of growth to start to develop these qualities and slowly start to live as human beings. So they're naked. When you think of naked, you think of defenseless, because human beings no longer had instincts to guide them, other than the most basic ones that a child has, and we don't really make acquired instincts, right? We make habits, but that's not quite the same thing. So humans have to have a brain that has to know how to live. Now, therefore, every human culture, or from the most basic to the most advanced, they have some way to interpret the world. It may not be a very good way to interpret the world. It may not be a very accurate interpretation of the world, but they have some way to contextualize their existence, to give it meaning, to know where they stand. They're essentially making some map of reality. Now, the map may not be accurate, but they make some map. And within that map, they make some goal. Now, it may not be a cosmic goal. Usually it's not. In capitalism, we make some interpretation of reality. It's materialistic. It's based on getting a good job, and et cetera, where people can contextualize their life and move with purpose, right? So you need a map and a goal, a way to understand reality and a goal, so you can start to move with purpose. And when you don't have this, you're naked. And the early attempts of human beings to make such a map were not very good. And for that reason, early human beings, their individuality was not very expressed. They had this basic ties the clan or tribe or group, and they didn't want to go out of it. There was no social mobility. People didn't conceive of themselves as really independent entities yet. This individuality, although we were technically had it, we were human beings. Through the process of human history, this individuality is finally getting born more and more. And this individuality, the more it expresses itself, the more human life, we have a feeling of we can act with purpose and independence. Yet at the same time, we get less security. And that's the balance. And if you start to get independence and less security, yet you're not ready for independence, then you feel isolated and anxious and alone. And so human beings always have this feeling that I'm alone and I'm isolated, because that's the reality of our life. We no longer have the security of nature. And part of us wants to move on this path of giving our individuality more and more independence from the bondages. Yet at the same time, if we don't replace that security with another way to relate to the universe, another way to find purpose in the universe, then that individuality becomes a burden for us. And we seek ways to escape from that individuality, ways to escape from our human qualities. And that's why we see people so many times, they're very easily distracted into feelings of nationalism and casteism and some way to identify themselves. That's why people like Hitler can, befool a whole nation, into, behaving like they're part of some big machine. It's why capitalism is such an attractive system for us, because we let a market system that is, dead money, a market system itself is controlling human beings, which is alive, which is society. Because in a way, capitalism is more advanced than any previous social system in the sense that individual can express itself more. We have a lot of social mobility, but still our individuality is somehow supplemented to a system which is not guided by human consciousness, right? So it will pass. As the individuality becomes more ready to express itself, we're going to evolve into another system along the way. Right? Now, in this sense, we see the evolutionary process is still going, except that it doesn't, to evolve further, we don't need to evolve more species. We've already had the human species where the Mahat is expanding. Evolution now becomes a social evolution. We're trying to make a society that's more advanced. Because what happens is when you're in the womb, you essentially go through the process that happened in evolution. Then when you're born, in the process of learning within the society you are, you go through the historical process of evolution of humanity as a child, and you more or less elevate yourself to a baseline standard that society exists at. And then it's up to your own individual initiative and effort if you want to go beyond that or slip beneath that. And so as we make a more society, if we can finally someday have a spiritual society, then people, by virtue of being born in that society, would be sort of elevated to a certain high standard where spirituality seems natural to them. And this is a process that's going on. This is a process we're all part of and working for in the continued movement of Pratisanchara. And it's still part of the evolution of consciousness back towards itself, except that now it's guided by human beings who are aware of what they're doing. Whereas before, evolution was a process where animals were just sort of, it was happening to them. And so I used a word here. I said human beings can create new samskaras. I'm going to explain that tomorrow. My lecture tomorrow is about samskaras. Samskara means action potentiality. It's what Buddhists talk about when they refer to karma. But samskara is a term that is more accurate. We'll learn about it tomorrow. So this is a human being. And when you go the next level, the Mahat expands behind the Aham. This is a divine person, right? This is the pinnacle form of mind that can create. When Mahat increases behind the Aham, happens through psychic clash and longing for spirituality, longing for to know consciousness. When we say intuition, we don't mean the dictionary definition of intuition. In the dictionary, it will say something like intuition means you can know something without going through a process of analysis, right? So I didn't analyze how to do something. Sort of, I just had an intuitive feeling. That's called focused intuition in spiritual literature. Focused intuition means that in a certain limited realm of my existence, my mahat is increased beyond my ego, beyond my feeling of doership. So like a guitar player, when they get intuition, they start to feel like this guitar is me. The I feeling extends to include that activity that they're doing, because the I feeling in that area has become more dominant than the actual part of my mind that's doing the action. And so when I'm learning guitar, at first I'm using my intellect to understand the music theory and to control my hands and practice for a long time. Then it becomes something I'm using to express myself, and not something, not an external, really a separate object from me. Or the farmer who is his whole life working on his land, he just grabs the soil and feels it in his hand or smells it in his nose, and out of a sense of joy and feeling with that soil, understands what plants will grow, what plants will not grow, what has to do with that situation. So this focused intuition is a result of my practice of life and my intellectual understanding. But when we use intuition in a general sense, not focused intuition, what we mean is intuition is the ability of the mind to realize its own subject, right? So normally you're in a situation where you have consciousness is looking at the mind, and the mind is looking at the flower, right? But when the mind stops looking at the flower and starts to feel there's something watching me, I'm not alone, that's intuition. And it results from the expansion of consciousness. And when you do your sadhana, if you have first lesson or you're just using Bhavanam Kevalam meditation, the real sadhana is when you get to a point where you sort of stop paying attention to the world outside and you're trying to feel consciousness. You're not just repeating the mantra like a parrot. You're trying to let that mantra have meaning for you, right? And something has meaning for you when your chitta can take some form, right? If I say the word car, that word has meaning because my mind takes the shape of a car. But if you take a word love, well, love doesn't really mean much to you until you fall in love with somebody, until you feel love inside. Then the word means something. And when you say Bhavanam Kevalam, well, we first translate it as love is all there is because the word love is a word that most people has meaning for them. But really it means that Brahma is everything, or consciousness is everything. But that only means something when you start to go in your sadhana and start to feel like, where's the consciousness? Where's that witnessing entity? Where is that subtle true self that I can't see but is seeing me? And that's what it feels like. It feels like you're not alone, like there's someone with you, something watching you. So I give this explanation of this feeling sometimes. And imagine there's a boy and he's walking at night and he's afraid, right? And when you're afraid, how do you feel? You're sitting there thinking, oh, who's there? What's there? What's there? You feel like someone's watching you. You start, oh, is it a ghost? Is it a bad person? You're walking alone at night. You don't feel alone. You feel scared. See, what's happening is this fear makes your mind concentrated. It makes when you're afraid that you might die, your ego kind of shuts down. It stops doing the things it's doing all the time. It stops thinking about what's for dinner or complaining or arguing with something. You know, like when you're angry at someone, it's really hard to not feel like to mentally argue with them. But if all of a sudden you feel like you might die, that you're going to stop thinking like that, right? Because all of a sudden, that seems like a pointless thought. And when your mind, that makes your mind concentrated. It makes your ego stop being your ego. You start to feel your own existence very strongly. And when you do that, you start to feel that someone's watching me. Well, that entity that's watching you isn't a ghost. That's your true self. That's your consciousness. Because you're not habituated with feeling that consciousness there, you think it's someone else who's watching you, but that's you who's watching you. That's your true self, and it's always there. And when you go into spirituality, you're trying to feel it, but not through fear. We're trying to feel it through love. And when you're in that moment, when you're concentrating your mind and your sadhana and trying to understand where is consciousness and searching for Brahma inside of yourself, you're making efforts to expand your mahat, expand your I feeling. That's the psychic process which you're going through. And for this reason, sadhana is called intuitional practice. This, I think, is the last slide. Yeah, there's no more slides behind this. I'm sorry, I didn't finish the presentation. So I guess, what time I finish? 9:40? No, okay, so I have 20 minutes left. All right, so I think what I'll do is I will say a brief analogy, which I find very beautiful, about this whole process of sanchara, pratisanchara. And after that, if people have some questions, we can ask questions for a little while. And okay, so when I first started the talk, I was saying, imagine you're a musician, but you've never played music before. Could you still call yourself a musician? Well, yes, if you had the ability to play music. Maybe you've never known it, but you've never played music. So imagine you're the most profound musician that has ever existed, but you've never heard music, you've never played music. You feel this music inside yourself as something purely subjective. It's a musicness. And there's no musician and no music. There's just this pure subjective essence of musicness that's urging to express itself, urging to understand itself, urging to know what it is and what its potentialities are. But it's unknown. It's just something subjective. Then in one moment, music sprouts forth from you like a water from a fountain. And you start to understand what it is. This music, this musicness, the purely subjective musicness has divided itself into music and musician. So the music is the subjective counterpart. So the music is the objective counterpart of the musician. And the musician is not just singing the music, the musician is also hearing the music. And so for the musician, although there may be a huge concert hall full of people they're playing for, their true audience is their own self, who's really the one listening to the music and really the one judging the music and really truly appreciating the music fully. The external audience can never truly appreciate the music as the musician itself can. And then you play music and you play music, and this music becomes more and more creative and more diverse. And as you evolve as a musician, you start to focus on playing more and more subtle music, more pure music, more music becomes so deeply meaningful for you and so subtle that eventually the outside world can't really understand it. And the music becomes more and more subtle. And then in one final performance, you perform this subtle music just for yourself. And you give your entire being into the playing of this final piece of music you've created that is so subtle that only you yourself can appreciate it. And you lose yourself in the playing of that music. You become one with the music again. And again, you're just this subjective entity. Music and musician is gone. There's just musicness again. And you're back where you started. Except the difference is now you understand what it was. You know what its purpose was. You know what its potentialities were. And you've completed the cycle. And so this is the the cosmic symphony, and we are all part of his music. And the purpose of this song is us, right? The purpose of creation is that eventually human beings will come back to this world and complete the journey. It was started by Brahma ages ago. And okay, so now I open it up to questions. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm running out of power. Okay. So does anyone have a question about something? Or I guess I forget we have comments here. I can look in them. Sorry, I need to plug in my computer. I'm moving over. To be more subtle than to experience it. Well, I mean, the analogy about music is a metaphor, and of course, I feel it's a good metaphor, but it has a certain limitation in the sense that, yes, in your sadhana, eventually, in the final moment, the spirituality becomes so subtle you can't experience it anymore. This we call samadhi, when you have lost yourself into Brahma, you become one with Brahma, and when you come back from that state, there is no memory of it. There is no experience you can point to. There was no experience because there was no mind left, right? But when you come back from it, you know you were gone, and you know that you feel this infinite joy inside. So that's in the spiritual realm. So yes, more subtle than the experience, but of course, that doesn't really make sense with the metaphor of the musician, because that's the problem with the metaphor of musician, of course, is that music is something you listen to, which requires physical existence. And but it gives a good sense of Brahma creating the universe and why he did it. Okay, I'm reading some questions here. Yes, tomorrow we'll talk about karma. What is the process through whom prana becomes prana? Thanks a lot. Okay, this one question about prana without the H and prana with the H is a very good question. And this is not really a question for an audience of new people who are hearing this concept of the Brahma Chakra for the first time. There's a lot of details which need to be filled in, and some of them are very subtle and very hard to explain. This question is, prana is physical energy within an object. Prana is life energy, and the transformation of one to the other, I didn't fully explain because I didn't want to burden people with too many details the first time. And so I'm going to avoid that question for now, because I don't want to overcomplicate things. Because in order to answer the question, I have to explain new concepts which I didn't explain, like Chitanu and Microdvaita. There's a lot of stuff involved in that. Well, I won't avoid it. I'll give an incomplete answer. Prana becomes prana when mind enters the object, right? An object with prana has not really mind. An object with prana has mind. And so prana is prana which is being controlled and by a mind. In that sense, it becomes life force, whereas prana is that same energy which exists in an object due to the simple pressure prakriti. Now, we cannot say it's only to physical forces, because prakriti is the spiritual the spiritual part of Brahma, right? It's not a more physical force, but its end manifestation is that you get this prana. And what the way it was explained in one of the books called Idea and Ideology is that this prana is the result of the cosmic cause, where consciousness first went Om, I am one, I will become one, many, and Mahat first came out, and its crudest effect. So as soon as there was that cosmic cause, there was, it had to reach that terminating point, and yet the cosmic cause was still making more and more mind, and that was putting pressure on this terminating point. And so because the cosmic mind can continue to create Mahat, Aham, and Chitta, there is pressure on that crude matter, right? You can think of it like this if you want. Why is there pressure for the seniors in high school to graduate? Well, because there's juniors who are coming up and they need to move. And they're there because sophomores. So the first children to go into kindergarten are the first ones to become seniors, the first ones to go to university. And everyone's getting pushed along because the next class is coming. And so there's pressures on teachers. Look, these kids have to learn. They can't remain seniors because then we'll have the new seniors are coming. And all this, why is the pressure happening? Because, well, we keep having babies, right? And so that it's sort of like there's like pressure to push it along. And because of this pressure, that object cannot get stuck in that position as an object. It has to respond to that pressure prakriti somehow. And this need to respond to the pressure prakriti is forcing it to become alive and forcing mind to enter there. And there's a lot of details I'm not talking about because they're very intricate, and it's a lecture in and of itself. Just that question would take a whole lecture by itself to explain. Sure, I can share that picture. Yes, reading the next questions here. We are hearing and reading about consciousness. So by intellect, we know we are consciousness. Why we have to experience it? Because we know about it. Why we need to experience it? Why doesn't this happen by knowing it, by intellect? I mean, you know about it, that doesn't mean knowing it. Like say I've never had a mango. I know mangoes exist. I can read in the dictionary, but it doesn't mean I know what a mango tastes like. Right? I mean, a better example is I can read about love in the dictionary, but everyone's saying, well, love is the best thing in life. They have children, they say, well, I've never felt love like this before. It gives meaning to my life. It makes me understand what I was here for. Right? And so the same question is like, what's the need to fall in love? Why I can't just read about it intellectually? What's the need to go see the Sistine Chapel? I can someone told me it was beautiful. I don't need to see it. Well, knowing about something intellectually is only to help you understand where to go, right? It's helping you have a map, right? Like the having a map, a road map to go to California doesn't mean you'll experience the California sunshine until you get there, right? To do that, you have to use the map and move along the way to get to California. So intellectual knowledge is just like a map. It's a pointer. Go this direction. This is the way to go. And what's the need? Well, I mean, it defines what you mean by need, right? You can live and die and breathe and without ever understanding what is consciousness. But consciousness is just a word. It doesn't really mean anything until you start to experience it, right? And the same, like love is just a word until you start to experience it. And why you need to do it? Well, that's why we're here. That was the purpose of the whole cosmic cycle, to expand and to grow and to realize that that's what makes human beings fundamentally different, is that they have a constant urge to expand. Because knowingly or unknowingly, everyone believes in reincarnation, right? If you ask someone, if you had only one day left to live, what would you do? Oh, I would party because I feel I don't have to suffer the consequences of my actions. But when someone's really in a situation where they have only one day left to live, that's not how they behave. They start to utilize that last day as best they can to serve others, to help others, to expand themselves, to express their love, right? Even an old lady is making effort to expand and to grow. And when we see people who are too incapacitated to mentally or physically make effort, we feel, wow, we feel very sorry for them because they can't grow. And the reason human beings always want to grow is because we feel inside, we know the growth I go through and experience in this life doesn't end when I die. It's not wasted. It's not for nothing. It's going to continue into the future, past the death of this body. We know this inside very deeply. And that's why we live the lives the way we do. Right? And so the great poet Walt Whitman has said, I know I have infinite time and space, yet I have no time to lose. This is my deepest feeling. I can't waste my time, even though I know I have all the time I need. Right? There are books about this. There's one called Elementary Philosophy. We were talking about that in the book club. The question was, is all this knowledge of the cosmic cycle found in any Sanskrit text? I don't speak Sanskrit. I know books in English that explain it. And if you're asking where it comes from the Upanishads, a lot of it is there, but it was systematized and organized and clarified and expanded by Sri Sri Anandamurti. And reading his books is where I've got my understanding. And in the book club, we're studying the first of the books that help to understand this cosmic cycle, called Elementary Philosophy, although it's honestly not so elementary. And then there's another book called Idea and Ideology and Ananda Sutram. And if you read these books, then you can start to piece together an understanding of this cosmic cycle. From Senior Graph of Sanchara Prada Sanchara, was atoms created after solid factor? Yes. Okay, so this is a very good question from Nantaraj. I talked about the 5 fundamental factors, but a fundamental factor is not the same as as an object. So solid factor is not solid object, and water is not liquid factor. Right? Every atom has all the 5 fundamental factors. Good Will Hunting quote. Did I quote Good Will Hunting? I didn't do it intentionally. I don't remember if I did. Oh, 2 people said that. Oh, what did I say from Good Will Hunting? Oh, maybe this. Oh, okay. I don't remember that movie, I guess. Okay, so back to this. Yes, so when you think of solid factor, if you want to relate this to physics or something, you can think of the heavy particles like the quarks, the protons, the neutrons. Liquid factor, you can think of the electrons. And so when we think of an electron flowing through a copper wire, that's liquid factor flowing through solid factor, right? Where you have the lattice work of the nuclei of the atom would be similar to solid factor. And the electrons are flowing through it. So, so when you say water or anything has all the fundamental factors, luminous factor is going to be related to light, obviously, or photons. And, well, when you say aerial factor, we're going to talk about dark matter. And to understand why I make these distinctions, you have to understand about Tanmantra, which I didn't talk about, and I'm not going to because I only have 5 minutes. And ethereal factor, essentially you would say, is empty space, but it's still physical, right? Before ethereal factor, it was purely mental. There wasn't even a space. And so anyway, I hope that answers your question, that yes, every atom has solid factor. Before solid factor, you had no objective entity. I mean, in fact, atom also has a little bit of mind in it, but it's not mind in the normal sense of the word. It's something we call a chitta particle. So atoms have a little bit of chitta. The difference between chitta particle and mind is the same as the difference between iron and a magnet, right? In iron, all the particles have a little bit of magnet, but they're pointed in random directions, so you don't get any magnetic force resulting from it. If you organize all those magnetic moments in the iron to point in the same direction, then they accumulate, and the piece of metal we call it a magnet. In the same way, there is some minute form of mind within even the atom itself, because atom is actually quite a complicated, organized structure. But that is just latent mind. You can't call it mind even. You can call it unexpressed mental capacity. If I wanted to use it without using a Sanskrit term, I would say it in English like that. There is some minute, unexpressed mental potentiality lying dormant within even the atoms. And when these atoms get together to form a structure like a virus or a living cell, these mental potentialities are organized the same way as not I don't say the same way, but similar to a piece of iron becoming a magnet, right? And then that mental potentialities becomes able to control the prana to make the life form evolve. So you can say Adam is an intermediate stage from purely sanchara to prati sanchara. On one side, you have no mind at all, just in the physical realm. You just have the fundamental factors. On the other side, you start to get living structures, and this Adam was sort of the balancing off point where the fundamental factors start to be formed into some object at first. So I can't say more than that. I don't have time. It involved too many other concepts. Could you comment on the difference between prakriti and shakti? So they're the same word, just different words, the same thing essentially. I mean, there's some subtle difference, but basically they're synonyms more or less, does the process of sadhana only develop that maha portion? No. Sadhana makes the mind expand. Now, in some people, their ego will remain very small, very humble, very simple. The mahat expand. And you meet some margis like this. They just want spirituality, and there's a lot of spiritual people in the world. We don't know about them because their ego their aham didn't expand, right? Their spirituality is service to God and stuff like that, but they're not really able to become spiritual teachers or spiritual force in the world. Of course, when people come in contact with them, sometimes we benefit by just their example. But for most of us, it expands the aham portion and the chitta portion. The whole mind is expanding, right? Now, the true spiritual expansion is the mahat expansion, to become bigger than the aham. But it doesn't mean the aham and other point are expanding. You have a general expansion. But for spirituality, you want that expansion to be at least concentrated on the mahat portion. The expansion of the aham portion is very important if you want to express yourself or do some work in the world, right? And the chitta portion expand also if you want to understand more things. And but aham and chitta can be expanded in other ways, right? You can go study mathematics or university. You're expanding your mind. Your mind is becoming larger. Your aham's becoming bigger. Your intellect's expanding. Your chitta's expanding means you can hold a more complicated object in your mind, right? If someone's teaching you about mathematics, you'll be like, okay, I can understand. And then all of a sudden you're like, my mind is full. If you tell me something more, I'm going to forget something else. The chitta reaches maximum capacity. But the whole time, your aham is trying to utilize the chitta to manipulate the chitta, to take the form of the idea the math teacher is teaching you. And at some point, your chitta is not big enough. And the math teacher keeps talking, and your aham's like, God, I'm out. My hard drive is full. There's no space in this computer anymore. But in that clash that results is going to make your chitta expand and make your aham expand so you can control it better. Now, spirituality and sadhana is going to expand the mind in general, but it's going to primarily, we want to expand the mahat, but of course the aham is going to be expanded, but aham is also going to be expanded in the process of service. And the difference between these two types of people is based on the samskara. Samskara means what work we have to do in the world. Some people have almost no samskara. They have no need to have an aham that does much, right? But a lot of us, if we only expand the aham or the mahat, we would feel maybe jealous or maybe left out, or we want to do something and say, okay, your aham's going to expand too, so that your ego has to feel satisfied with the work you've done and the role you're playing in society. Okay, so there's more to it than simple expansion of mahat. In the spiritual life also has to do with the burning off of samskaras that are holding you back and keeping you stuck in a cycle. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But so no, sadhana doesn't only expand the Mahat portion, but ideally that should be the main focus of it, right? How does it happen that the evolution is completed and mind and consciousness are merged? Well, that's what I said. There's two parts. When mind and consciousness merge, it doesn't mean the evolution is going on. Like, you have completed your journey, but there's still a whole universe full of living beings who are making their way. When you climb to the top of the ladder is still there, right? Other beings are making their way up the ladder. But when your unit mind and consciousness have merged, there's still the infinite cosmic mind there. You've just got liberation for yourself. Okay, our time is finished. I'm so sorry, but I think I've got through all the questions. And as far as sharing the video and watching again, I think I don't have control over that. I don't know whoever's the host will know that. So thanks everyone. I'll see you tomorrow. And we'll discuss about karma and samskaras and mind. So bye bye. Have a good day.